Dragon is in countdown. Falcon 9 is in startup. Dragon, SpaceX, go for launch.
You are looking live at Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center. In just over 20 minutes, this Falcon 9 rocket will lift off, carrying the 28th commercial resupply services mission from both NASA and SpaceX to the International Space Station. Good morning and welcome to live coverage of the CRS-28 launch. I'm NASA's Jasmine Hopkins. Fueling of the Falcon 9 began about 15 minutes ago, and we're counting down to an instantaneous launch at 11:47 a.m. Eastern Time. This mission will deliver about 7,000 pounds of science, supplies, and equipment to the space station. And these missions help NASA and our partners continue research to better our life right here on Earth and help us as we explore deep space. Let's go now to SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, where Zachary Lupin is standing by to tell us more about the vehicle supporting today's mission. Zach?
Thanks, Jasmine. Hello, everyone. My name is Zachary Lupin, and I'm an avionics reliability engineer here at SpaceX. And it's great to be covering today's mission in partnership with NASA. On your screen right now is a live view of SpaceX's two-stage Falcon 9 rocket with our Dragon spacecraft at the very top. Dragon is one of the few vehicles that can deliver significant cargo to the space station and the only vehicle that can deliver cargo from it. And to date, Dragon has visited the station 37 times and transported 280,000 pounds of cargo back and forth from the orbiting laboratory. Below Dragon is our Falcon 9 vehicle, which is actually two rockets in one. The lower part, also the largest part of the rocket, is called the first stage. It has 9 Merlin 1D engines, which accelerate the vehicle through the Earth's atmosphere and into various orbits in space. At the top of the first stage is the black inner stage, and above that is the Falcon 9 second stage. Now, the two stages will separate about 2.5 minutes into flight, and then the second stage will ignite its single Merlin vacuum engine, or MVAC engine, which is the 10th engine on the rocket, to carry Dragon to its desired orbit. Now, during today's mission, you will notice a shorter nozzle attached to our second stage. We are flying a shorter nozzle when we don't need as much performance to get payloads to their final destination. Now, for those of you following along, today marks SpaceX's 38th launch this year, 4th Dragon flight in 2023, and 237th mission overall. Now, Falcon 9 and Dragon were both designed with reflight in mind, and the vehicle hardware is built to support multiple missions with minimal refurbishment. Today's Dragon is flying for its 4th time and also marks SpaceX's 20th reuse of the vehicle. And the Falcon 9 first stage is flying for its 5th time, and we plan to recover and fly both the vehicle and the spacecraft again in the future. So far, we've reflown 170 first stages, including both Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, and we're planning to recover this booster on our drone ship, a Shortfall of Gravitas, which is currently stationed off the coast of Florida in the Atlantic Ocean. And if successful, this will mark the 198th recovery of an orbital-class rocket. Now, as the clock ticks closer to T0, let's head over to NASA's Megan Cruz at Cape Canaveral to talk about today's weather. Megan?
Thank you, Zach, and good morning, everyone. Welcome into Hangar AE at nearby Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This is where I can monitor the launch team as they take us through today's countdown. So far, hearing a lot of good things over the nets. The vehicle is healthy, the team working no issues, the range is green, meaning our path from here to the International Space Station is clear and safe. And the weather, which has been the issue all weekend, forcing the team to stand down Saturday and Sunday attempts. Today, we are 80% go. You can see those watch items on the bottom left of your screen. Launch Weather Officer Arlena Moses will be monitoring a few showers she expects to move into the area during launch. And I know some of you out there, you might be thinking it seems a little windy out here, but those winds are well below any concerns for launch. And as for the weather around the booster recovery area yesterday, high seas kept us from launching, but today, check out this live look from SpaceX's drone ship out in the Atlantic. Conditions are still a little rough out there, but better than yesterday. Hence, again, that 80% go for launch in just about 17 minutes. So right now, SpaceX is fueling Falcon 9 RP-1, or rocket-grade kerosene load, is complete. Super chilled liquid oxygen is being loaded into the first and second stage. You see those white clouds completely normal. That's some of the liquid oxygen venting off. SpaceX vents off some of that LOX to maintain the right pressure in the tanks. And those clouds form when the liquid oxygen makes contact with Florida's humid air. Our instantaneous launch opportunity today, 11:47 and 0 seconds Eastern Time, if we want to dock with the International Space Station on Tuesday, June 6th. For more on that, let's head over to Shaniqua Vereen inside NASA's Mission Control Center.
Thanks, Megan, and welcome to the International Space Station Flight Control Room. I am Shaniqua Vereen, live at the Johnson Space Center here in Houston, Texas. The team of flight controllers at Mission Control Houston today is being led by Flight Director Scott Stover. Teams here in Mission Control will really jump into action tomorrow night into early Tuesday morning as Cargo Dragon approaches the International Space Station. There are currently 7 crew members living and working aboard the station. Expedition 69 consists of NASA astronaut Frank Rubio, Dmitry Petelin of Roscosmos, Sultan Anayati from the United Arab Emirates, Woody Hoberg and Stephen Bowen of NASA, Andrei Fedyayev, and Commander Sergei Prokopyev of Roscosmos. As Cargo Dragon approaches the International Space Station in the morning hours of June 6, NASA astronauts Frank Rubio and Woody Hoberg will be monitoring the arrival from the station's cupola. Cargo Dragon will remain attached to the International Space Station, its zenith port of the Harmony module, for about 1 month, being one of 2 Dragons joining Crew Dragon Endeavour before being packed up with critical science and supplies that will splash down off the coast of Florida for that science to be analyzed back here on Earth. Everything is still a go from the Mission Control Center here in Houston, and we're looking forward to welcoming another Dragon to the International Space Station. So for now, we'll head back out to Kennedy. Jasmine?
Thank you, Shaniqua. Now we are about T-minus 14 minutes and counting from liftoff of CRS-28, so let's talk about the science. New experiments will soon arrive on the space station. Thunderstorm observation equipment could improve research on Earth's climate and weather. And astronauts will be growing a second generation of plant seeds in space to see if gene changes transfer to future generations. And those are just some of the experiments joining the hundreds of ongoing investigations already aboard the orbiting lab. This mission will also increase power supply on the station, delivering the 3rd set of roll-out solar arrays, also known as IROSAs. After being installed on upcoming spacewalks, the arrays will roll out into position, boosting power on the station by up to 30%. Now, across the country, NASA and our partners are making small steps and giant leaps in preparation for the Artemis II crewed mission around the moon. So let's take a look at our Artemis Moon Minute. All 5 major structures of the Space Launch System rocket's core stage have now been fully integrated at the Michoud Assembly Facility in Louisiana. The engine section is the most complex and intricate part of the core stage that powers the Artemis missions to the moon. RS-25 engine testing is underway at Stennis Space Center near Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. This test is part of a 12-test series that will certify the new design for crewed Artemis missions. The engine ran for its full planned 720 seconds, the longest duration to date. At Kennedy Space Center in Florida, technicians have been testing the solar array wings for the Artemis II service module. Orion will have 4 solar wings drawing in 11 kilowatts of power from the sun. Some of the avionics for Artemis II have already been to space. Technicians finished cleaning and removing avionics on the Artemis I crew module, which will be used on the Orion capsule for Artemis II in 2024. Now we are at T-minus 12 minutes and counting from the liftoff of the 28th Commercial Resupply Services mission from both NASA and SpaceX to the International Space Station. So let's bring back Zach now to tell us more about Dragon's flight history. Zach?
Thanks, Jasmine. For those of you following along, you'll know that it's already been a very busy year and couple of weeks for Dragon vehicles at the International Space Station. CRS-28 marks SpaceX's 4th Dragon mission of 2023, following the launches of Crew 6, CRS-27, and AX-2. The Dragon spacecraft supporting today's mission will be joining Crew 6 and Dragon Endeavour, which have been on station since March. Now, in order to make room for AX-2 and CRS-28 at the Harmony Zenith port on the ISS, the 4 members of Crew 6 underwent a port relocation on May 6th. And put another way, Dragon moved parking spots to make room for the incoming Dragons. A few weeks later, on Sunday, May 21st, Dragon and the crew of AX-2 lifted off from historic Launch Complex 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center and arrived at station about 15.5 hours later. And this is Dragon's fastest launch to docking time for a human spaceflight mission. After 8 days of living and conducting research on the space station, Dragon Freedom undocked from the orbiting laboratory and returned the AX-2 crew back to planet Earth off the coast of Florida at 11:04 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, May 30th. And this made room for the Dragon vehicle supporting today's mission. From the beginning, Dragon was designed to fly cargo and humans to and from space. And since Dragon's first visit to the space station in May 2012, we've come a long way. In that time, as I mentioned earlier, Dragon has visited the ISS 37 times, and 9 of those missions carried crew. In fact, the first time Dragon flew people was just about 3 years ago with SpaceX and NASA's Demo 2 mission to the space station. NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley took the first flight on Dragon on May 30th, 2020, returning human spaceflight capabilities to the United States for the first time since the space shuttle retired in 2011. The launch of Demo 2 also marked the first time in history that a commercial company successfully took astronauts to orbit. And since then, SpaceX has launched a total of 10 human spaceflight missions to space. And to help enable greater flexibility for future Dragon missions, SpaceX is preparing our neighboring pad, Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, to support both cargo and crew missions. As we fly more and more people to and from space, human spaceflight becomes more accessible and creates more opportunities for humanity to become a spacefaring civilization. And now I'll turn it back to Jasmine at KSC to take a look at one of the payloads flying on today's mission. Jasmine?
Thank you, Zach. One experiment on CRS-28 could be used to predict your risk for certain diseases, aging, and how our bodies heal. Earlier this week, I got the chance to speak with the brains behind Genes in Space 10. Joining us now is Christine Anwaha, a high school student from East Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Welcome, Christine.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, happy to have you here. So can you tell us a little bit about how you're feeling a high school student with your experiment heading to the International Space Station?
It's honestly a dream come true. This idea started off originally in my head, and now it's going to be a reality pretty soon, so I'm really excited.
Of course, we love that excitement, Christine, and we cannot wait to see your dreams realized. Can you break down what is the Genes in Space 10 experiment?
The experiment involved telomeres, and these are the repetitive sequences that cap the ends of our chromosomes. On Earth, telomeres normally shorten as we age, but for astronauts in space, they actually appear to get longer. And so with that, I developed an experiment to see if that process could be linked to the activity of stem cells. Now, in the development of that experiment, something really important was measuring telomere length. But it turns out that isn't something that can really be done on the ISS. Instead, experiments involving DNA length measurement need to be sent down to Earth, and that costs time and resources. So with that, the Genes in Space team and I got thinking, what if we developed an experiment that could help address that? And so we developed an experiment that will allow astronauts on the ISS to detect the 4-fold difference in DNA length. And so with that, it opens the door up for more kinds of research to be done on the ISS, such as into genetic monitoring, because being in space makes you more prone to genetic mutations. So that's something that can help with that. Also opens the door up for more research into telomeres to be done, and even broader.
Christine, that is so exciting. And your experiment was chosen out of over 600 applications. So what advice do you have for students who are also interested in this opportunity?
Yeah, I would just encourage other students to just explore their passions in space biology and pursue it as best as you can. That's what I did, and it led me to where I am here.
Exactly. Very excited to have you here. And tell me, what are your plans after high school? I mean, you've got some great things on the horizon, right?
Yeah, so in the fall, I'll be headed off to UNC Chapel Hill. I'm planning on studying either biology or biochemistry, and I'm really excited to get more involved with biological research in the future, especially space biology.
Of course. Thank you so much for joining us today, Christine.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Christine for speaking with us. And she is not the only student experiment going up on CRS-28. STEM engagement is very important to us here at NASA for the future of the Artemis generation. All right, now we are just about 7 minutes and counting until liftoff of CRS-28. So let's bring back Megan here on Florida's Space Coast and Zach live at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, to walk us through the final moments of the countdown. Take it away.
Thanks, Jasmine. It's T-minus 6 minutes and 50 seconds, and the SpaceX team is currently working no significant issues, and the vehicle is healthy. Weather is currently 80% go, and the range is ready to support today's mission. At this point, Rocket Propellant 1, or RP-1 fuel, is completely loaded on the second stage and nearly complete on the first stage. Liquid oxygen, or LOX loading, is currently underway on both stages and will complete at the T-minus 2 minutes mark to launch. We're also loading helium gas into both stages. Falcon 9 uses helium as a pressurant to backfill the propellant tanks as LOX and RP-1 are consumed by the Merlin engines during ascent. Helium load began before the broadcast went live and will continue to top off until about a minute and a half before launch.
And about 40 seconds ago, SpaceX performed the engine chill. That's when the team flowed a small amount of the super chilled liquid oxygen into the Merlin engine's turbopumps. They're basically prepping the propulsion system for the full flow of liquid oxygen. By doing this, they avoid a thermal shock to the system, ensuring engine startup
Stage 1
goes
fuel
well.
load is complete.
And you heard that call out for stage 1 fuel load complete. Now, Dragon also began its startup sequence at T-minus 35 minutes when it coordinated timing with Falcon 9. The spacecraft is currently undergoing vehicle health checks. It will enter terminal count at T-minus 5 minutes, with the next big step just a minute before liftoff, when Dragon will transition to internal power.
Now, you may have noticed those white clouds around the vehicle. Those are completely normal. They are chilled gas above the LOX tank liquid surface that we vent overboard to maintain pressure in the tank as needed. And when that gas comes out into contact with the warm, humid Florida air, the air condenses into clouds and water. Now,
You're at the eye, Bob.
for now, we should see the
Count. Falcon 9 tanks are pressurizing for strong back
the
retract.
transporter erector.
Dragon is internal count and
transporter erector,
internal
or
power.
The transporter erector, or TE, is used for vehicle rollout and to route propellants and electrical power to the vehicle in preparation for launch. And once those clamp arms have fully opened, the TE will then retract away from the rocket in preparation for liftoff.
We have a hot mic on the countdown net. All parties check your key panels.
Strong back lower has started.
We should see those clamp arms opening in about 15 seconds from now. Now, those clamp arms are located just below the trunk of the vehicle, which is beneath the Dragon spacecraft. And there you can see those clamp arms beginning to open around the booster. Now, in these last few minutes before T0, Falcon 9 is performing final health checks on its primary communications, avionics, and propulsion systems in preparation for flight. And we may hear callouts that engines are sufficiently chilled as we get a little closer to liftoff. Clamp arms should be fully open, and the transporter erector, that strong back, is going to recline away from the rocket. Now, you may have noticed in some of these shots, the Falcon 9 booster supporting today's mission is covered in quite a bit of soot, and that is because it previously supported NASA Crew 5, GPS-3, Space Vehicle 6, Inmarsat 6F2, and 1 Starlink mission. And you can see that strong back slowly reclining away from the vehicle.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
This launch will bring about 7,000 pounds of hardware, crew supplies, and science to the space station. One research project will study the effects of space on human DNA. Another will study the effects on plant DNA. Findings from both could help us advance things here on Earth, but also prepare us for future, farther missions into space. And Dragon will be docked to the space station for about a month before returning home. Now, checkouts of the second stage thrust vector control actuators are now underway. This is often referred to as an engine wiggle test. This is when SpaceX moves the thrust nozzles slightly to make sure the guidance hardware is ready for flight. SpaceX will do the exact same test on the first stage engines, but that happens just seconds before ignition.
Now, Dragon is also performing its final health checks to make sure all of the vehicle's primary systems are ready
Stage
for its
2 lock
rendezvous
load is
with the
complete.
International Space Station.
Dragon is
And
in
there's that
auto
call out
idle.
that stage 2 LOX loading is complete. That wraps up propellant loading for both stages of the Falcon 9. And as I mentioned earlier, you may have seen those white clouds around the vehicle.
Ground gas
Those
closeout.
clouds you see are the chilled gas above the LOX tank liquid surface that we vent overboard. And when that gas comes out in contact with the warm Florida air, the air condenses into clouds and water.
Now, Dragon is about to transition into internal power. Also, Falcon 9 computers will then enter startup mode, which is when the Falcon 9 flight computers take control of the countdown, guiding the rocket through the last seconds before liftoff. You should hear a call out about startup shortly.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Dragon is in countdown.
Both stages are now pressurizing for launch. At T-minus 45 seconds, we'll hear the SpaceX launch director verify go for launch.
Go for launch.
There you go. And at launch, the International Space Station will be flying 260 miles over the North Atlantic, south of St. John's, Newfoundland.
T-minus 30 seconds. Seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition, engines full power, and liftoff of CRS-28. Go Falcon, go Dragon.
Liftoff of about 7,000 pounds of science and cargo, including a new pair of solar arrays to boost power on the space station.
At T plus 40 seconds, Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from historic Launch Complex 39A in Florida. And we're now coming up on max Q in about 20 seconds from now. And this is the point of maximum aerodynamic pressure that the vehicle will go through during its flight.
Falcon 9 is supersonic.
And there's that call out that Falcon 9 is supersonic, traveling faster than the speed of sound.
Max Q.
And there you heard the call out for max Q. Coming up next are 3 events back to back, the first of which is main engine cutoff, or MECO, and this is when all 9 Merlin 1D engines on the first stage shut down. After those 9 engines shut down, the first and second stages will separate, and this is also called out over the nets as stage separation. From there, the second stage will ignite its Merlin vacuum engine to boost Dragon to low Earth orbit during SES, or second engine start one. And this whole sequence takes about 15 seconds. Should be expecting that call out for main engine cutoff in about 40 seconds from now. Some amazing views of our Falcon 9 vehicle as it takes our Dragon spacecraft to orbit. And in just about 10 seconds, we should see that main engine cut off.
MECO.
Stage separation.
INVAC ignition.
And there you heard those callouts and probably saw on your screen, main engine cutoff, followed by stage separation, and then second engine start 1. As I mentioned earlier, we're flying an MVAC nozzle, a shortened MVAC nozzle on our second stage. If you're just tuning in, you're watching a live webcast for the 28th commercial resupply mission to the International Space Station for NASA. This is SpaceX's 38th mission for 2023 and the 4th Dragon flight to the International Space Station this year. We lifted off from Kennedy Space Center's historic Launch Complex 39A just about 3.5 minutes ago. Now on your screen, on the left side, you can see our Falcon 9 first stage, which is going to descend back towards Earth, and the second stage on the right side of your screen, which is carrying the Dragon spacecraft. Now, as a reminder, today's mission marks the 5th flight for this Falcon 9 booster. Falcon 9 booster, which previously supported the Crew 5, GPS 3 Space Vehicle 6, Inmarsat 6F2, and 1 Starlink mission. In order to make its way back to our drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas, the Falcon 9 first stage has 2 more burns to execute. The first is the entry burn, where 3 of the Merlin engines will reignite. This helps slow the stage down as it re-enters the upper part of the Earth's atmosphere. The entry burn is followed by the landing burn, and this is a single engine burn that brings the vehicle's speed down rapidly in order to land on the drone ship. Now, occasionally with the Falcon 9 first stage on the left side of your screen, you may see some small white puffs, and those are nitrogen gas bursts that are used for attitude control. You can also see there on your screen a pair of the hypersonic grid fins. Falcon 9 is equipped with 4 of these grid fins, which are comprised of titanium, and they are positioned near the top of the first stage. Once in the atmosphere, stage 1 is only using the grid fins for steering as it makes its return to Earth. And these grid fins orient the rocket during re-entry and guide the rocket during its descent. Now, the Falcon 9 first stage has 9 Merlin 1D engines, and each engine generates about 192,000 pounds of thrust. On the second stage is the MVAC engine, which has a slightly wider nozzle, and the vacuum engine generates about 203,000 pounds of thrust. Next major milestone is going to be the first stage entry burn, which will take place just over a minute from now. There you can see an amazing view of our stage 2 with its shortened MVAC nozzle. The Falcon 9 first stage, which is not currently on your screen, has reached apogee and is now beginning its descent back towards Earth. The second stage is continuing to take our Dragon spacecraft to orbit. And we should see that first stage entry burn begin in about 15 seconds from now on the left side of your screen.
Stage 1, FTS has safed.
Stage 1 entry burn
The second
startup.
stage on the right side of your screen. And there's that call out for stage 1 entry burn startup on the left side of your screen. The second stage is continuing to take our Dragon spacecraft to orbit. Now again, the entry burn is the first of 2 burns that the Falcon 9 booster performs before landing on our drone ship.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
And there's that confirmation of stage 1 entry burn shutdown. As we get closer to first stage landing, it's good to note that the Falcon 9 first stage is equipped with 4 landing legs made of state-of-the-art carbon fiber with aluminum honeycomb. These landing legs are placed symmetrically around the base of the rocket and deployed just prior to landing. And if successful, this landing will mark the 198th time that we've recovered a first stage booster, including both Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy missions. We are about 25 seconds away from that landing burn beginning.
Stage 1 transonic.
Now, as the rocket descends through the Earth's atmosphere, this really puts deceleration into perspective. In the span of less than a minute, we'll have reduced from twice the speed of a jet all the way down to 0 as the rocket lands. And as Falcon lands, we may also hear a call out that the second engine will shut off around the same time.
Stage 1 landing burn. Landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And there you have it. The Falcon 9 first stage that supported today's mission has landed for its 5th time, having previously supported Crew 5, GPS 3, Space Vehicle 6, Inmarsat 6F2, and a Starlink mission. Today's landing also marks the 198th successful landing for an orbital class rocket. You may have also heard confirmation of good orbit.
Acquisition of signal, Newfoundland.
At T plus 9 minutes and 30 seconds into the mission, we are coming up on the last major task for Stage 2, commanding separation of Dragon a couple minutes from now. And we expect to have video of Dragon separation from the top of the second stage, which looks into the trunk. CRS-28 will be joining the Crew 6 vehicle, currently on orbit, so we'll be back to having two Dragon spacecraft docked at the International Space Station. As for cargo, today we will be delivering more than 7,000 pounds of science, research, crew supplies, and vehicle hardware to the orbital laboratory and its crew. To date, SpaceX has sent and brought back over 280,000 pounds of crew and cargo to and from the space station. And we should be seeing Dragon separation about a minute and a half from now. As a reminder, this is the 4th flight for this Dragon capsule, having previously supported CRS-21, CRS-23, and CRS-25 to the space station. Today's flight also marks the 20th reuse of a Dragon vehicle overall. Now, Dragon has 16 Draco thrusters on board, each with the capability to deliver 90 pounds of force. There are 4 pairs of 3 thrusters spaced evenly around the capsule, as well as 4 forward bulkhead thrusters underneath the nose cone. Now, notably, today's Dragon does not have super Draco thrusters, seats, or life support systems, as it's not carrying crew. And this saves on weight and space, and also allows for a faster refurbishment time. While initial designs of Dragon carried solar arrays extended outward from the trunk, the cylindrical structure located directly behind the Dragon capsule, the current Dragon has these arrays fixed directly to the trunk. And you may see at some point both a light and a dark side of the trunk, and that dark side is actually those solar panels, while the light side is a radiator to help cool the spacecraft. And speaking of solar panels, you can see on your screen right now the solar panels that we will install on the International Space Station. Once the Dragon capsule reaches the ISS, it will be able to autonomously dock using its navigation sensors, centerline camera, and light detection and ranging or LiDAR equipment. And there you can see on your screen Dragon separating from the second stage. Well, that's going to do it for me here in Hawthorne. The next milestone coming up is the Dragon nose cone opening sequence, which protects the double ring and navigational sensors. And I'll toss it over to Shaniqua in Houston to talk us through it. Shaniqua?
Thanks, Zach. Everything is still going well back here in Mission Control Houston. Right after Dragon separated, it began a series of automatic checkouts, including small firings of the Draco maneuvering thrusters. The next milestone is nose cone deploy. The nose cone protects that docking hardware and rendezvous and tracking elements on top of Dragon during ascent. The nose cone deploy uncovers the 4 forward bulkhead thrusters, which Dragon will use for its major burn maneuvers. And we do have confirmation that that nose cone deploy sequence has begun. Again, major burn maneuvers will be Dragon nose cone deploy uncovers those major hardware. It will also uncover Dragon eyes, that rendezvous and tracking hardware that allows Dragon to know where it is in space and how to find the space station. Once open, the nose cone will stay in that position until the very end of its mission, closing prior to re-entry to provide some of that additional protection to the same hardware during re-entry. It does take about 5 minutes for a nose cone to open. We are looking for 12 hooks, 2 sets of 6 that will open here. And once open, we will see the nose cone deploy. Again, that sequence has begun. And we'll be waiting to hear once all 12 hooks are open. And we will see movement of the nose cone as all 12 hooks open. After nose cone deploy is Cargo Dragon will be safely on its way to the International Space Station. If you're just joining us, NASA and SpaceX's 28th commercial resupply mission launched from Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida at 10:47 a.m. Central Time, 11:47 a.m. Eastern Time, and is currently in orbit. We're standing by now for nose cone deploy. Dragon is filled with over 7,000 pounds of cargo and supplies, including a variety of science investigations, hardware, and fresh foods for the crew on station. Some of those fresh foods that will be delivered include apples, grapefruits, oranges, cherry tomatoes, and blueberries. Dragon will dock to the zenith or space-facing side of the Harmony module, just recently freed up by Dragon Freedom, which brought up the Axiom 2 crew. The Axiom 2 crew aboard the SpaceX Dragon Freedom spacecraft safely splashed down off the coast of Florida at 10:04 p.m. Central Time, 11:04 p.m. Eastern on May 30th, 2023. The crew's return officially concluded the second all-private astronaut mission to the International Space Station. Axiom 2 commander and retired NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson ended her 8-day mission with a new record of 675 days in space, the most of any American or woman. And while we're discussing records, NASA astronaut Frank Rubio will end his mission this fall, breaking a record of his own. Rubio will return to Earth aboard a Russian Soyuz spacecraft no earlier than September 27th, and in his stay aboard the orbiting laboratory, having logged a total of at least 371 days in orbit. That tour of duty will beat the previous record of 355 days set by NASA astronaut Mark Vande Hei in 2022. Joining Rubio on station are 6 other crew members living and working aboard the International Space Station. Expedition 69 also includes Dmitry Patelin from Roscosmos, Sultan Adiyati from the United Arab Emirates, Woody Hoberg and Stephen Bowen of NASA, Andrei Fedyaev and Commander Sergei Prokopyev of Roscosmos. All crew members are awake, and after enjoying a midday meal, some are headed to exercise, while others are headed to do some spacewalk procedure reviews. NASA astronauts Stephen Bowen and Woody Hoberg are prepping for a June 9th spacewalk to install one of 2 new rollout solar arrays on the space station's starboard side truss structure. This cargo resupply will bring up 2 new rollout solar arrays packed inside its unpressurized trunk.
Acquisition of signal. Good, Heli.
And again, if you're just joining us, we are currently waiting on nose cone deploy of the CRS-28 cargo spacecraft. That sequence has begun just a few minutes ago, and it does take about 5 minutes for the nose cone to fully deploy. After confirmation of nose cone, that the nose cone has been deployed, we will have a special guest join me for a quick interview. He will talk a little more on what Dragon is bringing up and its benefits to the International Space Station. And back here in the International Space Station room, flight control room, while we are waiting for that nose cone to officially be fully deployed, we will have flight controllers that are monitoring the systems on station itself ahead of Dragon's arrival Tuesday morning. Again, once the nose cone is fully deployed, we will have Cargo Dragon on its way to the International Space Station. Once Dragon does cross that approach ellipsoid, which is that mythical sphere around the space station, flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston will begin joint operations with SpaceX teams in Hawthorne, California. Again, we will have NASA astronauts Frank Rubio and Woody Hoberg, who will be monitoring the approach and arrival of Dragon with a planned docking time on Tuesday morning at 4:50 a.m. Central Time, 5:50 a.m. Eastern Time. Once Cargo Dragon is docked to the station, Rubio and Hoberg will begin hatch operations to open the hatches between the International Space Station and Cargo Dragon. And again, this is live mission operations of the CRS-28 resupply mission to the International Space Station. If you are just joining us, we are currently waiting on the nose cone deployment of the vehicle. And we currently see that nose cone currently opening. And we have confirmation of nose cone deploy. And there we have it. We have nose cone confirmation of deployment. And now joining me on the phone is manager of the International Space Station Transportation and Integration Office, Phil Dempsey. Hi, Phil.
Hey, Shaniqua.
Thanks for joining me. And as we get into it, can you outline the major activities for the crew with CRS-28? I know we talked some of what's being brought up, but can you go a little more in depth for us?
Sure. During this mission, there's quite a bit of research that has to be done. So the crew will start, unloading the Cargo Dragon. There'll be actually quite a bit of research that's done in time to complete it and return those samples to the ground at the end of this dock mission. As well as that, we're carrying up some IROSIS, external solar arrays that have to be installed with a couple of EVAs during this mission.
Of course, and these resupply missions, just like you mentioned, are delivering science, hardware, and other cargo to the
Heads up.
Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue à cette conférence de presse. Je m'appelle Guillaume Saint-Pierre, je vais être votre modérateur. Cette conférence de presse concerne donc une mise à jour sur les feux de forêt qui sévissent au Canada. We will start with statements for about 20 minutes. We will start with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, after Bill Blair, Emergency Preparedness Minister, and also Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson. Pour terminer avec la ministre de la Famille, Gould. On a une période de questions avec le premier ministre d'environ 15-20 minutes. Après ça, il devra quitter.
After that, the Minister of Immigration, Sean Fraser, Minister Stephen Guilbeault, and the Minister of Northern Affairs, Dan Vandal, will be present, but will not be speaking at the beginning. But all the ministers will be staying longer to take questions. Prime Minister Trudeau, you have the floor.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Good morning.
Here today, we stand with the hundreds of courageous women and men fighting wildfires across the country. We stand with the communities who've been evacuated and with people from coast to coast to coast who are enduring this painful, heartbreaking time. Here today with Ministers Blair, Wilkinson, Gould, Guilbeault, Fraser, and Vandal to talk about the federal response to the devastating wildfires we're seeing across the country. Minister Wilkinson will have more detail in a moment, but our modeling shows that this may be an especially severe wildfire season throughout the summer. We're going to get through this together, and our government will keep being there with whatever it takes to keep people safe and provide support. 2 weeks ago, I went to Edmonton and spoke with the Canadian Armed Forces members who are helping in Alberta's firefight. I also met with many people from communities that had been evacuated. Some of them had only a few hours to pack. They were told to bring pets, important documentation, medication, and that's it. This is a scary time for a lot of people, not just in Alberta, but right across the country, including in the Atlantic, the North, and Quebec, too. I think of people like Catherine in Nova Scotia. Even though she's lost her home, she found time to get help to her friend who's also affected and didn't want to be alone to see what was left of her own place. When people lose their homes, they don't just lose a roof and their possessions. They lose a special place where they saw their children grow up, where they built a life for themselves. This is incredibly difficult and heartbreaking. Canadians will continue to be there for you and with you. In the last week, I've spoken with Mayor Savage of Halifax, Mayor Locke of Shelburne, and Premier Houston, as well as with Premier Smith and other local leaders. Il y a 2 jours, j'ai parlé avec le Premier ministre Legault.
2 days ago, I spoke with Premier Legault about the wildfire situation in Quebec. I also talked with the mayor and Le Serre and the head of Luakshot Matam, Mike McKenzie. We spoke about the situation on the ground. As you are aware, members of the armed forces have already been deployed to help. Several wildfires cannot be predicted, so it's important to listen to local authorities to make sure that everyone stays safe.
Government is here to help. So far, we've approved 3 requests for federal assistance in Alberta, in Nova Scotia, and in Quebec. This includes deploying Canadian Armed Forces members for things like personnel to aid in firefighting roles, airlift resources, and engineering support. Minister Blair will go into more detail about the status of this work in a moment on what we're doing to keep people safe right now. Year after year, with climate change, we're seeing more and more intense wildfires, and in places where they don't normally happen. That's why we've invested to train more community-based firefighters across the country. For example, we've worked with the Yukon First Nations Wildfire Partnership to train 130 wildland firefighters in Yukon and northern British Columbia. In Newfoundland and Labrador, we partnered with the Innu Nation to train community members. In Manitoba, in Ontario, and in many other places, our support allowed more firefighters to be trained. And last week, we announced that through the Wildfire Training Fund, we're supporting over 300 Indigenous firefighters and 125 Indigenous fire guardians to be hired and trained this season. À travers le Centre Interservice des Feux de Forêt.
Through the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center, we are collaborating with other countries to fight against the wildfires here and throughout the country. For example, in the past, we sent Canadian firefighters to support firefighters in other countries like the United States and Australia. And since we are facing very intensive fires here, we are receiving hundreds of firefighters from other countries to support us.
Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and France for the firefighters they've already sent and will continue to send over the coming days and weeks. And on top of that, we're engaging further with other international partners about more reinforcements over the coming weeks. Before I end, I know there's a lot of Canadians who are asking how they can help too. The federal government and the government of Alberta are coordinating a donation matching program with the Canadian Red Cross 2023 Alberta Fires Appeal. So every dollar donated will become $3 in support to those affected by wildfire in Alberta. And as announced last week, we will set up similar donation matching programs to help people in the Northwest Territories and in Nova Scotia. This is a difficult time for many Canadians. If you have friends or family members who are affected, it's important to continue being there for one another. I want to thank the volunteers, first responders, CAF members, and of course, the firefighters who are doing their work like the true professionals they are. I know that firefighters are often away from their family. I was talking with the CDS, the Chief of Defense Staff, about how some CAF members are personally affected by fires. Some have had their homes damaged, some have seen their families evacuated. But despite all of this, they continue to step up to help and protect others. Thank you. To all Canadians, let's continue supporting our firefighters by listening to local authorities. And across the board, whether it's with members of the armed forces, to Parks Canada resources, to firefighters and equipment, the Coast Guard, Health Canada, and the Service Canada support, which Minister Gould will speak about shortly, our government is standing up support to keep people safe today and for wildfire seasons to come. I'll now turn it over to Minister Blair. Merci tout le monde. Bill.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Bon après-midi tout le monde.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Begin by providing a bit of a situational update. To date, there have been 2,214 wildfires nationally so far this year, and approximately 3.3 million hectares have been burned. And across the country, there are currently 413 wildfires burning, and 249 of those fires are deemed out of control. There are also 18 active wildfires specifically impacting First Nations, with 6 in Alberta, 5 in Saskatchewan, 1 in the Northwest Territories, 4 in Quebec, and 2 in Nova Scotia. And as of yesterday, an estimated 26,000 people remain evacuated from their homes across the country. I will acknowledge that the images that we have seen so far this season are some of the most severe ever witnessed in Canada. And the current forecast for the next few months indicates the potential for continued higher than normal fire activity. Releasing the information that we're providing today will allow people and governments to prepare. And because they know that when they are prepared, we can reduce the risk that these events pose. And it enables us to position the resources and the supports the Canadians may need and be ready to mobilize them if a situation requires it. The Government Operations Center supports the planning work and provides stable, around-the-clock coordination of the federal response to all emergencies. They constantly monitor evolving risks and liaise with the provincial and territory officials to ensure a swift, smooth, and coordinated approach to provide any federal aid a province or territory may require, including by reaching across the entire federal system to activate different supports that any jurisdiction may need. And through the exceptional work of the Government Operations Center, we have been able to respond quickly to requests for federal assistance from both Nova Scotia and from Quebec. And this, of course, is in addition to the request that we approved from the province of Alberta last month, and it has led to the mobilization of Canadian Armed Forces personnel and assets in both provinces, with further supports being provided by other federal departments and agencies. And for example, in Alberta, there are roughly 150 soldiers currently deployed in support of firefighting tasks in the Fox Creek region and in Fort Chipewyan. In Quebec, there are now 150 soldiers deployed to the Sept-Îles region. And in Nova Scotia, we have provided ignition specialist personnel and equipment to support their efforts, and an immediate response unit consisting of 200 soldiers from the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Canadian Regiment, and they have now completed the necessary Type 3 firefighting training. They're ready to immediately deploy from CFB Gagetown, and once the province assesses that conditions are suitable and safe, they will continue and commence firefighting operations. In addition, firefighting support is also being coordinated by the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre, commonly referred to as CIFC. And since 1982, CIFC has coordinated the sharing of firefighting resources between the federal, provincial, and territorial agencies responsible for wildland fire management and with our international partners, as the Prime Minister indicated. These resources are shared on a formal basis through a mutual aid agreement which outlines 3 categories of resources. They provide support of equipment, personnel, and aircraft. And during periods of escalating wildland fire activity, CIFC matches the agencies that have specific resource needs with the agencies that have resources available. This season, personnel and resources have already been deployed between provinces and territories. And as the Prime Minister acknowledged, we are very grateful for the support Canada has received from our international partners, including Australia, the United States, New Zealand, South Africa, and other countries to come. We are expecting further deployments from these countries, including France, in the coming days and weeks, and we have been assured that CIFC continues to find the necessary firefighters, personnel, and assets to support the firefighting operations across Canada. In addition to the work of CIFC and Canadian Armed Forces, Public Services and Procurement Canada is working closely with the Government Operations Centre and stands by to provide technical support and expertise in civil engineering for bridges, buildings, or other damaged critical infrastructure. PSPC can also provide emergency contracting support for goods and services, air assets, and temporary accommodations, as well as warehousing service for emergency stockpile and equipment, which may be required to support the response. NGOs, including the Canadian Red Cross, are supporting multiple regions across the country. Community organizations and local volunteers are providing essential support, care, and compassion to people who are under immense personal stress, and their work represents a key component of Canada's response to these emergencies. With federal and provincial contributions, our matching program with the Government of Alberta and the Canadian Red Cross has raised over $22 million. And we have also committed, as the Prime Minister indicated, to similar matching programs with Nova Scotia and the Northwest Territories. I want Canadians to know that all orders of government are working closely together, with your safety in mind and with a high degree of cooperation and collaboration. And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank my provincial and territorial counterparts and all of the municipal leaders that we've spoken to for their excellent partnership and hard work. The situation remains serious, but there have been some very positive developments over the weekend. On Saturday, Alberta rescinded their provincial state of emergency. Rain and cooler temperatures have brought much needed relief to Nova Scotia. And to the firefighters, first responders, search and rescue personnel, members of the Canadian Armed Forces who continue to move into danger to keep our communities safe, we recognize your heroic service to Canadians, and we offer you all our collective thanks. Thank you very much. Merci. I'd like now to turn it over to my colleague, Minister Wilkinson.
Thank you, Minister Blair. Good morning, everyone. I also want to acknowledge the incredibly challenging circumstances that folks across the country are facing and the ongoing efforts of firefighters, volunteers, and everyday Canadians who are stepping up to support each other. As I said last week, the federal government is here to support Canadians and at-risk communities throughout this year's fire season and into the future. À cette fin, Ressources naturelles
Natural Resources Canada is therefore working in close collaboration with different partners to develop a model that predicts wildfire dangers throughout the year. These models are regularly updated and made available to the public to ensure that they are as precise and timely as possible.
We released our updated modeling for the wildfire season. It is, in a word, sobering. It shows that the risk of wildfires is set to increase in June and remain unusually high throughout the summer across the country. It shows us that this year's already devastating season could well get worse. It is important to note that this model anticipates risk levels, not actual fires. With good fortune, it is possible that the full extent of the risk does not materialize, but with preparation, we must be ready for whatever happens this year and into the future. Every province and territory will need to be on high alert throughout this wildfire season. While this is not yet Canada's most severe fire season, if this trajectory continues, it very well could be. In terms of historic averages of area burned, we have seen 10 times normal so far. Going forward, as usual, Natural Resources Canada will continue to update its modeling to keep all Canadians apprised. While provinces and territories have primary responsibility for firefighting personnel and equipment, this federal government has recognized that additional firefighting resources will most certainly be required moving forward. We have also recognized the need for work to help at-risk communities adapt to the impact of a changing climate. C'est pourquoi le budget.
That is why the 2022 federal budget committed $516 million for wildfire mitigation, response, and surveillance, and to improve the federal coordination during emergency response.
To enable provinces and territories to buy specialized firefighting equipment, to train new firefighters, and to incorporate Indigenous traditional knowledge in our fire management systems. This past year, we contributed to 6 provinces and territories to acquire firefighting equipment. This has been critical for our counterparts in the procurement of vital resources such as vehicles, mobile units, avionics upgrades, hoses, pumps, and enhanced communication equipment. It's expected all provinces and territories will participate in the fund this year. And last week, I announced that under the first phase of our wildfire training program, we had signed agreements with 9 Indigenous communities and organizations to help train more than 300 Indigenous firefighters and 125 Indigenous fire guardians all across Canada. As I noted last Thursday, and in light of the urgent wildfire conditions in Canada, my department is pleased to be working with the International Association of Firefighters to advance a pilot project that would increase Canada's wildfire fighting capacity. This project will be focused on training structural firefighters to respond to fires in the wildland-urban interface due to the particular risks those fires pose to homes, communities, and infrastructure. Le travail se poursuit sur tous ces.
Work is continuing on all fronts, and we intend to send as many firefighters as possible on the ground. This means more people with the skills, knowledge, and expertise in communities that need it most.
Natural Resources Canada will continue to monitor and to model wildfires and wildfire risks in Canada. We are also going to enhance our abilities to do so with the $170 million investment in Wildfire satellite mission, the world's first purpose-built public satellite system for monitoring fires, which is targeted to launch in 2029. Once operational, Wildfire Sat will help reduce wildfire losses, help us defend communities and avoid unnecessary evacuations, allow us to better protect our resources, infrastructure, and environment, inform emergency decisions, reduce health problems associated with smoke and air pollution, and help prevent more disastrous fires. Les incendies de forêt ont.
Wildfires certainly took place before we started to clearly see the acceleration of the effects of climate change. However, we are now experiencing a new reality, one where we need to pay attention to what science is telling us.
In there to provide assistance to provinces and territories that require near-term support. In the long term, we are also making investments in building the capabilities that Canadians will most certainly need going forward. Canada has made combating wildfires a high priority over the last number of years, And with the accelerating impact of climate change, we very much will continue to do so moving forward. Thank you very much. And now over to my colleague, Minister Gould.
Thank you, Minister Wilkinson. I too would like to join my voice of gratitude to all those who are involved in the emergency response, especially as many of them are facing very challenging situations in their own personal lives as well. As my colleagues have said, as the wildfire situation across Canada evolves, we will continue to make every effort to help and support those impacted. Emploi et Développement Social Canada.
Employment and Social Development Canada has set up an intervention group to manage emergencies, to coordinate and plan our response to wildfires and maintain services being offered to Canadians. We are focusing on service provision to Canadians affected by the wildfire situation. We need to show proof of flexibility to allow quicker access to services and to provide services as quickly as possible through direct deposits using mobile services and Service Canada.
Outreach units to evacuation centers to support applications for services such as employment insurance. For those affected by the wildfires, ESDC continues to deliver and prioritize applications for income support, including EI, OAS, GIS, and Canada Pension Plan. We have also put in place additional procedures to facilitate EI claims where employers are not able to issue records of employment or where paper checks may not be deliverable due to the wildfires. In addition, Service Canada is actively conducting wellness checks on temporary foreign workers. We're checking on them by contacting their employers. Si vous êtes un travailleur affecté par
If you are a worker affected by the wildfires, I strongly encourage you to apply for an employment insurance benefit online, by telephone or in person as soon as possible. Even if you do not have your employment document, your applications will be processed as a priority.
Wildfires. Apply for EI benefits online, by phone, or in person. Even if you do not have your record of employment, your application will be prioritized. If you are an EI, CPP, or OAS recipient who has not signed up yet for direct deposit, I strongly encourage you to do so you can receive your benefits sooner. La livraison des chèques papier.
Delivery of paper checks by the postal service may be disrupted because of the affected zones. You could register for a direct deposit by sending an application through Service Canada. A worker would contact you 2 days after your application. You could also communicate with the call center responsible for the benefit you receive.
You can submit an e-Service Canada request online to get help with many services, including but not limited to CPP, your social insurance number, passports, and Ukraine immigration measures. Service Canada employees are also available to help through the Service Canada Outreach Support Centre. The toll-free number is 1-877-631-2657. Nous savons que les prévisions.
We know that predictions indicate that there's going to be extreme wildfires throughout Canada. Service Canada employees will continue being there to support all those who are affected by the wildfires.
These support services to anyone, anywhere in Canada who has been affected by these wildfires. You are not alone. Please do not hesitate to reach out to a Service Canada Centre or the Outreach Support Centre if you need assistance. We are here for you. Thank you. Merci.
Donc, on va maintenant passer à la période.
Now we'll start with questions.
15 minutes, and then the ministers will stay until about 1 o'clock. So we will start in the room, and then we will go virtually. Those who are connected can use the raise hand function. Alors, on va commencer avec Ashley.
We'll start with Ashley Burks, CBC.
Prime Minister, right now it takes about 4 to 5 days to train Canadian Armed Forces members who don't have training already in areas like Nova Scotia. Is that fast enough? And in light of what we're seeing right now, should the Canadian Armed Forces play more of an active, specialized role and a bigger role in fighting fires here in Canada?
The Canadian Armed Forces have demonstrated their capacity to respond to extreme weather events, unfortunately, all too often over the past years, and have developed extraordinary expertise in supporting provincial firefighters and other emergency responders. It is true that there has been a greater concentration of forest fires, wildfires out west in recent years than in Atlantic Canada, but through training and through transfers of CAF personnel from the west to east, the Canadian Armed Forces are more than able to respond to the necessary challenges. For the longer term, we're going to continue to look at lessons learned, including through this difficult summer, to make sure that we are ready to face the increased risk of extreme weather events in the coming years.
And Paul Bernardo has been transferred from a maximum security facility to a medium security facility. What do you think of that? And is there anything that your government can do to reverse that?
I fully and totally understand how shocked and appalled so many Canadians are on hearing that news. Minister Mendicino came out very strongly last week, indicating that he was going to find clearer answers and explain to Canadians what happened and what we're going to be doing about it. I leave it to him to follow up on that.
Émilie Bergeron, La Presse Canadienne.
Émilie Bergeron, La Presse Canadienne. Good afternoon, Mr. Prime Minister. Predictions indicate that the wildfire activity could remain higher than normal in July and August. Already, the firefighters are working very hard, and they've been doing so for weeks throughout the country. And monthly predictions could change, of course. What are you telling those firefighters who are already there and maybe already almost burnt out to make sure that they don't die? Answer, first of all, we tell them, thank you. We know how hard they work year-long to make sure that Canadians are safe, particularly during this wildfire season. They spend extremely long days under very difficult circumstances. Of course, they have our entire support, and we are planning for a succession, and we have people abroad who are sending firefighters to help us. We are in discussions with other countries to make sure that we have resources in the weeks ahead if the season extends beyond the summer. And we will also work in close collaboration with the various jurisdictions and regions to make sure that those who are protecting us from those fires are themselves properly supported and protected. Question, in the same vein, if it continues in July and in August at the level of the Canadian Armed Forces, does Canada have enough resources to make sure that support being sent be able to continue in July and maybe in August? Answer. This is a question we are all thinking about. We are planning for additional resources for the next months. I put the same question to the Chief of Defense Staff when I spoke to him on Friday. Current predictions reassure us that we will have enough resources to deploy throughout the country, but we are aware that the situation can change. So we are preparing a contingency plan. But we know that Canadians can rest assured that we are going to do all that is necessary to protect them throughout the summer.
Given the very serious projections of what this summer's wildfire season could look like, this is a question whether there'll be enough resources for the entire summer for all the potential wildfires that come up. This is actually a question I posed directly to the Chief of Defense Staff when we had a conversation about wildfires on Friday. With the given projections, it is expected that we have enough resources to cover the summer. If things get worse, we are developing contingency plans, and we will, of course, make sure that we are there, whether it's leaning more on international supports, whether it's standing up other resources. We will be there to ensure that all Canadians are protected right through this summer.
Mia Rapson, CP.
Yes, good afternoon, I guess it is at this point. I'm wondering, given that even the experts earlier today, the fire experts blame climate change for some of this fire activity, the Minister of Natural Resources mentioned that, why has your government continued to approve fossil fuel projects when climate scientists have said that we need to stop doing that?
Our government has put forward some of the most ambitious plans and targets to fight climate change of certainly any previous Canadian government, but also more ambitious than many of our allies around the world, certainly among fossil fuel producing countries. We know, given the international context, including the war on Ukraine, there is going to be a need for fossil fuels and traditional resources for the coming years. At the same time, we are investing more than any other government has in investing in renewables, in new forms and new reliable sources of energy, because we know that getting to net zero by 2050, by hitting our climate targets by 2030, is a way to both protect Canadians from the extreme weather impacts of climate change over the coming decades and ensure great jobs and a competitive economy in a net zero world. Canada can and will be the net zero supplier of choice in the coming decades, and we are investing in order to get there.
The Correctional Service of Canada had the ability to waive the privacy rights of Paul Bernardo in order to explain to Canadians, and particularly the families of the victims in this case, why he was being transferred. Do you think they should have done that, and would your government do anything to make sure that that can happen?
That is exactly the kind of conversations that Minister Mendicino is having with Correctional Services of Canada this week.
Valérie Gamache, Radio-Canada.
Radio-Canada. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. We know that the wildfires will keep growing over the years. Could Canada set up a special squad, a federal special squad, and maybe a special appliance that doesn't belong to the Army? We already have an interagency forest fire center that was in place since over the past few years, and over the years we've increased resources for the operation of this center. And we are constantly looking for ways of responding to this new reality of new wildfires and dealing with extreme weather events over the next few years. For now, we are reacting and responding to this immediate emergency in the country, but reflections have started already to make sure that in the coming years, we will have all the necessary resources we need, and that's part of our reflections. Thank you. Question, we're talking about 12 times more hectares that have been burned over the past 10 years. How much time do you think would Canada need to recover from this situation? We know that communities like Lytton have not yet totally recovered in their municipality. Answer, we know that it takes years to rebuild houses and communities that were affected and burned down by those wildfires. But besides rebuilding, we need to think about building better to make sure that we think about that as at the same time we are increasing houses and creating new residential communities throughout the country. We need to think about the challenges that will come with more extreme weather events and more wildfires in the future. That's part of the conversations we are having with the provinces and cities, together with experts, and we shall continue to participate in all these conversations and solutions.
Brian Pacifiume, National Post.
Good afternoon. Can somebody talk a little bit more about engaging First Nations communities in the help of the wildfire fight? Numbers, personnel, how many communities are involved, what sort of things they're doing?
I will turn to other ministers for more details, but I can tell you from my own personal experience, a number of years ago, there was a wildfire in northern BC where there were lots of learnings that we had about making sure that we were properly engaging not just the federal government, but provincial governments with Indigenous communities, with First Nations communities who are not only there to stand and protect their communities, but have expertise that goes back centuries and indeed millennia in terms of knowledge on how to keep their communities safe from wildfires. Over the past years, we have significantly increased the coordination, cooperation with Indigenous leadership and communities in a tripartite way, federal, provincial, and Indigenous, and that will continue. But I think, Bill, you can speak to this.
Yeah, just some numbers. I mentioned some of these before, but there are currently 18 active wildfires that are directly impacting First Nations. Across the country, 6 of those are in Alberta, 5 in Saskatchewan, 1 in the NWT, 4 in Quebec, and 2 in Nova Scotia. There have been already significant evacuations from those communities. There's been some damage to those communities as well as a result of these fires. And there are a number of places as well where the communities are isolated currently, and those are some things that we're dealing with those provincial jurisdictions and with Indigenous Services Canada. We know that, you know, fire is a naturally occurring event, and particularly in the north, and in many of these communities, quite frankly, that's been part of their history, and they're used to it. But where there's an interface, where that fire comes in close to their communities, when residents are at risk, critical infrastructure is at risk, when bridges and roads are compromised, power and water supplies, all of those things are very impactful. We're working very closely with those communities, but there have been a number of people who've been evacuated from their communities, and we are supporting them currently in other locales.
Second question for the Prime Minister, just a little off topic, but last week we learned that Special Rapporteur David Johnston had hired a PR firm Navigator. In your opinion, is this a good use of public funds?
We've seen, unfortunately, from the beginning of me having appointed a serious Canadian to deal with this serious issue, that the opposition parties, particularly the Conservatives, have chosen to make it about baseless personal attacks and extraordinarily toxic partisanship. I'm not going to speak to decisions that the independent special rapporteur and his team are making to manage the toxic climate that they're operating in. I will continue to stay focused, as will former Governor General David Johnston, on responding to the very real issues around foreign interference, around the very real threat to institutions, to our democracy, to Canadians, to businesses that foreign interference represents. And I will continue to encourage the leader of the official opposition to get a briefing from our intelligence services and agencies so that he can base his critiques and his concerns in facts and not just continue baseless smear jobs against a Canadian of unimpeachable integrity in former Governor General David Johnston.
Annie Bergeron-Oliver, CTV.
Hi. The Conservative leader is threatening to block the budget and bring forward 900 amendments because of what he calls your government's inflation-fueling actions. I'm wondering what you think of this characterization and of the demands that he's made of your government.
The Conservative leader has no plan for the economy, proposes nothing but cuts. When he's blocking the budget that voted on, is passing through the House with support of a majority of parliamentarians, he's blocking things like the doubling of the tax credit for tradespeople on their tools. We know how important it is to get the construction season up and fully running through this summer, and yet the leader of the opposition is blocking tax credits for tradespeople for the new tools. He's blocking the anti-flipping measures that we brought in this last budget to protect homeowners and home buyers from speculation. That's going to have a direct impact on Canadians. And he's blocking the enhancement of the Canada Workers' Benefit, which is going to continue to put more money in the pockets of hardworking Canadians who are struggling to get by. These are real-life consequences for the political and partisan games that the leader of the official opposition is engaging in. The Conservative leader stood against dental care for kids. He stood against help to lowest income renters. And now he's standing against all the measures that will help in the budget, proposing instead to cut programs and leave Canadians on their own. That is not how you build a strong economy. It's not how you create great jobs into the future. So we're going to continue to put support for Canadians at the center of everything we do in these difficult times, despite the Conservative leader's effort to harm Canadians so he can attack this government.
And you talked about it briefly in French, but given the increasing risk that we're seeing of wildfires, is your government considering the creation of a national wildfire department with dedicated squadrons, more fire bombers to ensure that communities are better prepared and they can respond faster?
We have since 1982 had CIFC in the Canadian Interagency Firefighting Centre that has, over the past years, grown in importance and relevance. We continue to work with it. Right now, we're very much focused on getting through this difficult season in the immediate and supporting Canadians. But absolutely, as we know, that climate change is going to bring more and more extreme weather events into the future, more dangerous floods, more difficult and devastating wildfires, more intense hurricanes and storms. We are going to need to continue to step up in our support for Canadians. This is why we move forward with a national adaptation strategy that puts billions of dollars on the table to work with municipalities and provinces to build back better, to create more resilience, and to better protect Canadians from the impacts of climate change into the coming decades, at the same time as we remain unequivocal in our fight against climate change. Again, there are some politicians that still think you can have a plan for great jobs and growing the economy without having a plan to fight climate change. But Canadians know that fighting climate change is necessary both to create those great jobs and opportunity, but to also prevent the catastrophic and very expensive losses that Canadians are facing increasingly over the years.
On me dit que c'est tout le temps qu'on a pour le...
I'm told that's all the time we have left for the Prime Minister, but there's one other question in the room if he wants to stay. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you.
Natasha Wilowski.
Hi, I would have rather put this question to the Prime Minister, but seeing as he's gone, I'll ask you, Mr. Guilbeault. The government keeps pointing to confidential reports from TD and BMO, two banks that are involved in financing the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, to claim that the project is still commercially viable. They won't share these, and I learned that those secret reports are based on a 100-year timeline, assuming that the pipeline will be in operation for 100 years, collecting revenues, when the average lifetime is 40 years. I'm just wondering how the government, and I understand you're not in the finance department, but as they won't answer my questions, I'm hoping you can shed some light on how the government is able to justify using those reports when experts, including the PBO, have said multiple times that a 100-year timeline is just not a realistic lifetime for a pipeline.
Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I don't have those information, but what I can commit to doing is making sure that we get you some answers. I will work with my department, and I will talk to my finance colleague, Minister Freeland, to try and get you those answers as rapidly as possible.
Thank you very much. And as a follow-up on the wildfires, I've heard a lot from environmental groups about how one of the problems being faced with huge issues like this is trying to work across silos in government. I know that there has been a lot of work done to coordinate efforts across departments, but as Environment Minister, are there any areas you see where ECCC or other departments could step across those silos even more and try to look to the future past the immediate response to, see what could be done to get ahead of this next year, as we can assume it will get worse?
Thank you. I mean, I think no one here will deny that government or governments have a tendency to work in silos, but I think that we are making a lot of efforts to change that. I'll give you two concrete examples. The emissions reduction plan that the Prime Minister tabled last year was a concerted effort by many of the people on the stage and many other people who aren't on the stage, like Minister Wilkinson and many others. And I know, like, we tend to use the example whole of government, maybe too lightly at times, but that's not one of those instances. Same thing for the National Adaptation Strategy. Minister Blair, myself, Minister Wilkinson, and a number of other departments have been involved in coordinating the development of both the Federal Action Plan on adaptation, which was qualified by the Canadian Insurance Bureau as world leading just last December, and the following National Adaptation Strategy, where we will pull in the work of provinces, territories, Indigenous nations, municipalities, companies, to ensure that when it comes to adaptation, we are, as a nation, better prepared to face the impacts of climate change, which we're not now, and I think none of us would deny that. So we are trying more and more to, certainly on the forest fires, there's a lot of coordination between many of our departments on our respective responsibilities, to ensure that nothing falls through the cracks.
To our moderator, if I may just supplement, just because the question's been on my mind a lot about working across silos and between levels of government as well. I've rarely seen anything like the response I've seen in the past few days. Huge credit to a number of people that you see here. Minister Blair in particular, your responsiveness has no doubt helped save lives of people who live in my home province. To see people break down barriers across silos has been extraordinary. We had, within about a day, Transport Canada have aerial surveillance on the ground. The next day, comfort trailers were set up by the Coast Guard. The following day, helicopters started arriving. There was a pre-existing programs that are funded by a multitude of departments, whether we're talking about CIFC, the NRCan training, the disaster financial assistance arrangement. The Prime Minister called me personally to say that we would be there in whatever way we could. Since then, we've set up the Red Cross matching donation portal. We've got ignition specialists who've landed. DND has, and thank you to Minister Anita Anand for getting planning and coordination efforts there. Immediately deploying the Department of National Defense fire trucks to see that there's now coordination going between governments to help water bombers land at military bases in Nova Scotia. PSPC has jumped in to offer contracting support. The measures that Minister Gould outlined around EI, around other benefits offered through ESDC, even my own department, trying to facilitate the issuance of travel documents. There's no shortage of other examples I could point to. Private helicopters being licensed to help respond in the emergency. Recognizing that a lot of people on the ground are volunteers. In my own constituency, we are covered by about 36 fire departments. All but one are volunteers. To see the responsiveness from my colleagues, and credit to provincial officials, Ministers Laura and Russian. Actually, we gave Minister Laura a ride from the airport from Ottawa downtown today. He's in town for meetings later. There has not been a silo that's existed over the past week of my life in government. It is so deeply encouraging to see that when I make a phone call or send a text, within 90 seconds, I'm receiving substantive responses. This is a model for response, in my view, how we should work across departments. And I just want to say, as a Nova Scotian who spent some of the last few days talking to families who've been displaced, I'm grateful. And to see the leadership, in particular, from Minister Blair in this regard, gives me a lot of faith that we get the right people working on the job.
And moderator, I apologize, but I'm going to jump in here too, because I'd like to take an opportunity just to tip my hat a little bit to the public service. We have an extraordinary public service here in Canada, and their counterparts provincially and municipally right across the country have done an extraordinary job. We've convened a number of tables of senior officials responsible for emergency management, and as well through our own Government Operations Centre, virtually every department of the Government of Canada is at the table. And our senior officials in every department have worked very closely and collaboratively. They've been remarkably not just responsive to what's been taking place, but they're working to anticipate what's going to be needed. The collaboration that Minister Fraser indicated between provinces and municipalities, territories, and First Nations is critical for us to get this done. And we are very blessed in this country to have a remarkable team of dedicated professionals who make that work.
We will now turn to the people online. We have one question from Steve McKinley, Toronto Star. Go ahead, Steve.
Hi there. Question for Minister Wilkinson. When wildfires strike near to wildland-urban interfaces, the cost of those fires goes up exponentially. Now, National Resource Council has put together a guide on a national guide for wildland-urban interface fires. Somebody I spoke to was saying, that's the problem with it is it's just a guide. That some of these things cost money and we can't count on developers to spend more money than they have to. Is there any motivation or any action to turn some of that guide into code, into regulation, into law, or to poke the various provinces into doing so?
You're on mute, Jonathan.
Sorry about that. So thank you for the question. It is an important one. I think in the past, we have often thought of wildland fires as distinct from structural fires that exist in urban communities. And so we have firefighters within the urban communities that are often members of the International Association of Firefighters. We have wildland fighters that are trained by the provinces and territories by and large and by Parks Canada. And we haven't seen a lot of intermixing. We have guidelines, as you say, with respect to practices that can help to try to address some of the risks in the interface. I do think that going forward, we are going to actually have to try to find mechanisms through which we can be a bit more prescriptive, or that we can more strongly encourage some of our provincial and territorial counterparts, who I do know many of them are thinking along these lines, to ensure that we are enabling people to adopt the kinds of practices that will actually help us to reduce fire risks in the interface. Concurrent with that, as I mentioned in my remarks, we actually have started work with the International Association of Firefighters to work in that interface, to actually train structural firefighters in communities across the country on how best to actually think about addressing some of the risks and addressing fires that actually do end up in that interface. So it is an emerging area. It is something we are very live to. It is something that provinces and territories, I think, are increasingly aware of, many of whom are actually dealing with this interface right now. And it is certainly something that's going to get more attention going forward.
Thank you.
Do you have a follow-up, Steve?
No, thanks. I think that's good for me.
Okay. I believe we have one more question in the room from David Turton, CBC. Okay.
Minister Guilbeault, would you pause the federal fuel charge commonly referred to as the carbon tax, especially in Nova Scotia that's been hard hit by wildfires? Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said today Canadians can no longer afford to pay for heating. He's calling you to of course, cancel the federal fuel charge. Is this something that you'd be considering maybe at least pausing in Nova Scotia, given, yeah?
Thank you for the question. It is somewhat unbelievable that as Canada is going through what will likely be the worst year in our country's history in terms of forest fires, and that we know that part of this is because of climate change, and that we collectively, certainly in Canada and around the world, need to do more and accelerate the fight against climate change. The only answer that the Conservative leader has is, let's make pollution free again. Let's do less to fight climate change. I find it unconscionable that that's the only thing that Pierre Poilievre has to say. And we've been very clear about our plan for many years. We've been deploying this plan, and we've been accompanying our plan with measures to help Canadians make the transition. And in fact, the clean fuel regulations was something that the Conservative Party of Canada had in their platform during the last election, as they did on carbon pricing, saying that it would go up to $170 a ton by 2030. The difference really between us and them is that when it comes to climate change, they're all talk and no action. They have nothing to say about fighting climate change, let alone how do we help Canadians be better prepared to face the impacts of climate change. I have never heard Pierre Poilievre talk about adapting to climate change. Why would he? He doesn't believe in it. His party doesn't believe in it. Members of his party are standing in the House of Commons to say that they don't believe in climate change. Why would they care anything about what we need to do to help Canadians? So I'll stop there.
Tu avais un follow-up? OK, alors c'est toutes les questions qu'on avait pour...
Those are all the questions we had for you today. Thank you for staying a bit longer. Much appreciated.
Recording stopped.